Alright, so in this video, this is the Russian Revolution Part 2. Part 2. If you're watching this video, you've already learned Part 1. I'll review that in a second. This video is going to start where the Russian Civil War is. It's going to end after Stalin. So just about half of this PowerPoint. To review, you guys should be taking notes, things like that. But let's just review. World War I happens, Russia gets involved, Russia is too weak. They should not have gotten involved in World War I at all. The Tsar, Nicholas II, is a very absolutist ruler, and he's causing a lot of unrest. He's crushing opposition, such as Bloody Sunday. People were peacefully protesting, and 500 to 1,000 people were pretty much murdered by their own governments. That was called Bloody Sunday. Russia's extremely weak after the Russo-Japanese War, and it just keeps getting weaker as it's involved in World War I. Anyways, we talked a little bit about Rasputin and how he gained so much power while Nicholas II was away during World War I, and people really distrusted him and assassinated him. And they put in Nicholas II essentially had to abdicate his throne, and he stepped down, and they developed a provisional government. And that provisional government's goal was to eventually hold a constitutional convention, create a more enlightened kind of government, one that will serve the needs of the people a little bit better. But the biggest mistake of that provisional government is that it still did not withdraw from World War I. And Lenin comes back to Russia. Vladimir Lenin is a Marxist, and he leads a Marxist revolution called the Bolshevik Revolution. It's a coup d'etat. It's a small group of Bolsheviks who are radical socialists. And he overtakes this provisional government. So it goes from the Tsar to this provisional government. Tsar steps down, provisional government, and now this small group of communists, led by Lenin, overthrows the provisional government. Well, while Lenin and the Bolsheviks, they came to power, but people didn't take them seriously, and then they realized, wait, the Bolsheviks are here to stay. The Bolsheviks are very much like the Tsars. They put down any opposition using a secret police force called the Cheka. They'll kill you or make you disappear if you disagree with them. And the Bolsheviks did withdraw from World War I, which is what a lot of people really wanted. But in order to withdraw from World War I, they had to sign the Treaty of Brest. I don't know if I'm pronouncing it right. Brest-Litovsk. And essentially what it did is it gave a lot of the European part of Russia, this pink stuff, to Germany. And people were really upset with that. And they were upset that the Bolsheviks decided we're going to cancel any plans to have a constitutional convention and give anyone the right to vote or have any say in government. We're here to stay, and we're your new government. And to be clear, most of Russia was not Bolsheviks. Bolsheviks were just a small group of people that took over in a coup d'etat. So yes, the Bolsheviks, they withdrew from World War I, but they caused a lot of unrest, and people were very unhappy with them too. So what we're going to get next is the Russian Civil War. The Russian Civil War essentially is a war between two revolutionary parties. You know, we got the Reds, make sure you write Reds, underneath Reds, the Bolsheviks. Those are what we call the Reds. The Whites are the people who didn't want a czar, but they are mostly made up of the upper nobility and the middle class. They're the people who make up the Whites. And so this civil war goes on from 1918 to 1922. Looking at this map, area of Bolshevik control is really in northern part of Russia. It's kind of up here. And it's where there is a lot of industrialization. So the Bolsheviks have control over the 1 second. The Bolsheviks have a lot of control over the areas of the cities and the industrialization parts. The whites are kind of at a disadvantage. They're not really unified geographically or ideologically. So the whites, like I said before, they're made up of the upper class Russians, like the nobles, and the middle class. And the upper class and the middle class, they don't have the same goals. The upper class is against the Bolsheviks taking control because the Bolsheviks want to, they're communists. They want a country where, there's no social classes. If the Bolsheviks gain power, then they're going to destroy the Russian nobility. They're going to take away all of their extra money and extra land and give it to the peasants. Same thing for the middle class. The middle class, they have a lot of businesses. And the Bolsheviks, if they were in power, would nationalize all of those businesses. So remember, the goal of a socialist government is for the government to take over everything. That's what the Reds want. That's what the Bolsheviks want. And these Bolsheviks are radical socialists. Eventually, they want to get to a communist state where they don't even need to be governing anyone. They just will have a classless society. But remember, it's a stage thing. It takes a while to get there, but they're going to try. And the peasants, for the most part, there's a lot of peasants in Russia. And Lenin and the Bolsheviks their motto is peace. What is it? 1 second. Oh, it was peace, bread, and land. Lenin and the Bolsheviks were promising the peasants land taken from the nobles. And we're going to give the peasants some land. We're going to give them some food. They didn't actually give the peasants food. At one point in the war, the Bolsheviks took more food from the countryside to bring it to the cities to fight the war, which caused this massive famine amongst the peasants. But the peasants, they had to choose between the Reds and the Whites, between the Bolsheviks and between the upper class and middle class. And essentially, the peasants were kind of neutral, and they had two bad options to side with, and they decided to side with the Reds, because at least the Reds were going to give them something at the end of this if they were to win. If the upper and middle class won, the peasants would get nothing and would continue suffering as they've always suffered. And so just the fact that the peasants kind of sit on the sidelines really hurts the whites. And it's ultimately one of the major factors the whites lose. So make sure you circle Reds, the Bolsheviks. They're going to be the ones that come out on top. At the height of the Civil War, the Bolsheviks decide, they're a little bit afraid that if the whites do win, that they're going to put the royal family back on the throne. At least put the son on the throne. And in order to prevent that, you got to get rid of them. The royal family has been on house arrest, essentially, for this entire time. And the Bolsheviks decide to execute them. They bring them down to the basement. They read them their execution orders, and they shoot all of them. There was a little bit of confusion as some of the women hid jewels. They sewed them into their clothing. And so there was some bullet ricochets and there was some confusion over whether or not they really died. There was this myth that maybe Anastasia, one of the daughters, got away and came to the United States. But DNA tests confirmed much later that these crazy women who were claiming that they were Anastasia, the runaway Russian princesses, were not at all. They were just crazy ladies. But there was a little bit of confusion, but they were all executed during the Russian Civil War, so that there was never a chance of having another czar on the throne. And against all odds, essentially, the winner are the Reds, are the Bolsheviks. And with this, they decide to turn Russia into a communist country. They they called themselves the Union of the Soviet Socialist Republics, the Soviet Union. So let's see. I'm gonna fix that real quick. Let's see. All right. So remember what the Soviet groups were called from last unit? The Soviet groups were these councils made up of workers and soldiers who essentially were governing different localities of Russia as the Tsar was losing power. So it's those worker and soldier councils, the union of them, bringing them together. Socialist meaning we are going to create a country full-blown socialism. The government is going to control everything. The government's going to own the land and give it and redistribute the wealth, redistribute it to the peasants, take from the nobility and the middle class, and create a classless society. They're going to become a communist country, right? Communism town. And republics is really just means, they're going to say that they are a republic, that there is some representation and that people have a say in their own government. But that's just propaganda. That's not true whatsoever. If you disagree with the communist regime, you will disappear or you will be executed. But the USSR is now what they are known as after the Russian Civil War. The Bolsheviks win, and their goal is to turn Russia into a communist party. Remember, socialism is just the first step. So we got a communist party. Trotsky was the one who was in charge of it for a while. And essentially what they're going to do is they're going to try to create a classless society. They're going to take all of the nobles, they're either going to exile them or they're going to execute them, or they're going to force the nobility to the bottom. They're going to do the same thing with the middle class. They're going to give land to the peasants. In the short term, they do create a classless society. They do create a society that's only made up of the working class. In the long term, we're going to see the development of multiple classes. New classes will just develop from this. But in the short term, they actually are quite successful in destroying the class system. They're going to run all of the farm and the land and the businesses. They're going to destroy anything about the old capitalistic system. However, the Civil War really destroyed Russia's economy. Trade was at a standstill. Industrial production had dropped. Many skilled laborers had left and went to other countries. So Lenin is looking at his country, and he is a communist and he wants to be a communist, but he realizes he needs to temporarily put aside his plan, and he comes up with this thing called the NEP, the New Economic Policy, and he decides he is going to put aside his plan to have a state-controlled economy, and he's going to restore a little bit of capitalism back into the system. He's going to allow people to have a little bit of private property. So, for instance, peasants, he's going to allow them to sell their surplus crops and make a profit instead of having to turn over anything extra to the government. He's going to allow, the government's going to keep control over some of the major industries, but he's going to allow some small factories and businesses to operate under private ownership. And he's also going to make some political reforms. There were many different nationalities within Russia, and that had always been an obstacle to national unity, to unifying under the Russian flag, and to have pride in being Russia when you have a very diverse group of people. Let's see, where was I? So some of the reforms that he does put into place will be to divide up Russia a little bit and have more local governments to check and make sure that nationalism doesn't increase in some of those smaller places. And the effect of all these reforms and of the new economic policy, small scale capitalism, is it's going to help Russia recover after a war, a civil war. Civil wars are painful, they are harmful. Both sides are seeing destruction. Both sides are dying within one country. The death tolls are very high. And so Russia is slowly going to recover its economy. However, let's see. Oh yeah, the country's farms and factories were producing as much as they had before World War I by about 10 years later. However, Lenin's not going to see the last bit of recovery. We're going to see a new guy come to the scene, and his name is Joseph Stalin. He starts out as a very quiet man. He's just the general secretary, but essentially he puts people in power that will support him and enable him to gain more and more power. He puts them in specific offices where those people can support him and support his promotions. And essentially he's going to become a dictator. He's going to fight it out with this guy who was the original one of the leaders after Lenin. But this guy, Trotsky, is eventually going to be exiled because Stalin gains so much power. And essentially he is an absolute dictator. He is what we call a totalitarian dictator. So a dictator, you guys all know what that means. A dictator is somebody who, he's like a king. There's only one of him. He holds all of the power. He is not elected by the people. He is absolute. You cannot go against what the dictator says. But when we say he is totalitarian, we are saying that he takes total control over every aspect of public and private life. Total centralized state control over everything. So we used to talk about absolutism. It's a little bit the same thing, except it's more modern. He has total control over public and private life, over everything. Totalitarian leaders like Stalin, they appear to provide a sense of security, to give direction for the future, since he is in control of everything. It's possible to be a totalitarian leader and communist leader. Communist is just the economic system that he wants to create. He's going to try to accomplish a communist system, economic system, with his totalitarian rule, his total rulership. We got to make sure, like Mussolini, we're going to learn about Mussolini. He's going to be a totalitarian leader. He's going to take control over everything. But Mussolini is going to be fascist, not communist. And the two are different, which we'll talk about in the future. So what Stalin is going to do is he's going to create a command economy in which the government makes all of the economic decisions, determines what's going to be produced, how much things are going to cost, how much you're going to pay people. And Stalin, what he decides to do is he decides Russia needs to industrialize. And so he's going to create what we call 5-year plans. We need to do all of this in 5 years. And when the 5 years is up, he's going to create another 5-year plan. So just kind of economic goals that you can work towards every 5 years. To promote the development of the Soviet Union's economy. So for instance, in these 5 years plans, what he's going to do is he's going to set really high quotas or goals to increase the output of steel, coal, electricity, oil. And in order to reach some of these really high goals, the government's going to limit the production of consumer goods. So because we need to have this much oil, you're not going to get this toy or this piece of clothing. Everyone needs to be producing what we need as a country. So there's going to be major shortages on housing, food, clothing, and other necessary goods because everyone's just trying to produce enough steel, coal, and oil and electricity to meet the 5-year goals. Under this system, Stalin's totalitarian regime, the government's going to control every aspect of the worker's life. So instead of the factory owner, the government's going to control this. The workers are going to be assigned jobs by the government, are going to be told by the government when they're working, how long they're working. You're going to need the police's permission to move towns. There's going to be secret police everywhere ready to imprison or kill those who don't contribute to the Soviet economy. And so we're going to see, a lot of unhappiness, but again, you can't do anything about it. There's a secret police out there. They're out there to get you if you complain. After the first 5-year plan, we're going to see, really, really great progress at a cost to these Russian people's lives. But let's see. Most of the 5-year targets are going to be met, and they're going to make a lot of impressive gains. And what they're going to do next is they're going to create another 5-year plan in 1933. And that's going to be just as successful. We're going to see industrial production in less than 10 years increase by more than 25%, which is pretty good. The next step that Stalin wants to do is to collectivize the farms. When we say collectivize, what we're talking about is he wants the government to seize over 25 million privately owned farms in the USSR. And he wants to combine them into one huge government-owned farm. And hundreds and hundreds of families are going to be working on these, producing food for the state, for the people. If you disagreed with this, well, there's nothing you can do about it. There were a lot of peasants who did not want to give up their land. They just got it after the Civil War, and they resisted. They killed their livestock. They destroyed some of their own crops in protest. And Stalin essentially used terror and violence to force them to work on these farms. And I think about 5 million to 10 million peasants died as a direct result of Stalin's agricultural revolution. And even especially the wealthy peasants, they're going to be very upset with this. And they're just going to be, Stalin's just going to decide to execute them and send them to work camps. By 1938, more than 90% of all peasants are going to live on and work on collectivized farms. But it's going to work because that year, the country's going to produce almost twice as much wheat as it had 10 years before collective farming. So it's working. Russia's catching up. It's producing more food and more industrialized goods, but at a huge cost, and it's extremely repressive. It's going to cause a lot of major problems. So many people are going to be unhappy with this. So many people are going to die under these collectivized farms and industrialization. We're going to see lots of famines in other parts. And there's nothing that these people could do about it under this communist totalitarian regime. There is this secret police everywhere. They would ask children to tattletale on their parents. And like Stalin's secret police would use tanks and armored cars to stop any riots. They would monitor all the telephone lines, read mail, plant informers everywhere. And at one point in 1939, Stalin is going to even turn against members of his own Communist Party and launch a great purge, like a campaign of terror. and eliminate anyone who threatened his power. So thousands of old Bolsheviks who helped stage the revolution in 1917 are going to be executed. This is like another reign of terror, except now in Russia. And the state had authority to punish even the most minor acts. And everyone was suspicious. Everyone was possibly going to be arrested and killed as a criminal to the Soviet Union if they did not show unfailing loyalty to Stalin. That great purge went on for about 5 years, and by the end of it, Stalin had gained complete control over the Soviet government and the Communist Party. So historians think 8 million to 3 million people died. Way, way more than the couple months of the Reign of Terror. Essentially, a totalitarian ruler like Stalin is going to rely on propaganda, biased or incomplete information used to persuade people to believe a specific thing and accept certain beliefs and actions as good. So they're going to have Soviet newspapers, and they're going to have Soviet radio broadcasts, and it's going to glorify all the achievements of communism, of Stalin, and all of his economic programs. He's going to use art to do this as well. And he's going to censor all dissent. He's not going to allow anyone to speak out against him. So a ruler like Stalin is very dangerous. We're going to see the same type of government form, not a communist one, but a totalitarian government form under Hitler. Essentially, Hitler's going to do a lot of the same things in terms of how he's governing as a dictator, and he's going to crush any opposition to take full control. And Stalin is going to be the guy we talk about who enters Russia into World War II. So that's all we have for this lecture today. This is the last unit, so make sure you go back and you really study this stuff. If I were you, I would at least timeline most of it, and then make sure we maybe flashcard some of the 5-year plans. They're in the book. Maybe Bloody Sunday. Go through and flashcard some of these terms. Find the definitions and study them in a way that quizzes yourself, and make sure that you know what you don't know before the day of the test. Okay, thank you so much. Bye-bye.